Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the third installment in the series here with the leaders of the community here. So we have James Tiffany and Stefan McTeef. They're over in the UK. As you notice, the awesome logos there. They are VMware Code coaches as well. There's also Gareth Edwards. I think he's out today because he's over in Japan. But yeah, today's topic. I think James and Stefan do a great job of giving you guys and giving everybody an overview and letting them know what's going to happen today. So without further ado, let me pass this off. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you for that, Frankie. So today we're going to continue the series. So we've gone through an overview of VCF in general. Last week we went through the bring up and what that contained. And today we are going to cover things like the workload domain and some of the requirements around NSX and things like that. So this is, like I say, we've said this before. This isn't a how to you're going to pass the exam. This is giving you a full overview of VCF so that you know all of the information, and then hopefully that and the bits you do will enable you to pass the exam going forward. So what we're going to do is talk about workload domains. So we discussed that the management domain that is created as part of the bring up needs at least 4 vSAN ready nodes. You might need more, you might need less, but that is what hosts all of the components. So once you've got the nodes, you can look at a workload domain. So we discussed last week where you could have the management domain, you could add additional clusters into the management domain, but the majority of people will look at deploying workload domains. So the workload domain is made up of a number of nodes, depending on which primary storage you're looking at running. Depends on the number of nodes you're looking at. So for vSAN, you're looking at a minimum of 3 nodes. For fiber channel, it's 2 nodes. So it depends on what you're looking to do with that environment. Depends on the number of nodes you're going to need. So for the first workload domain, you'll get virtual center, so that gets deployed. And for the first workload domain, it is non-negotiable that you'll have NSX deployed as well. So where I say it's non-negotiable is that for the first workload domain, you have NSX. For the additional workload domains after that, you have the ability to either use the NSX deployment in the first workload domain, or you can have separate deployments for each workload domain. So that's where it differs slightly, in that you can either consume the NSX from the first workload domain or just continue using it going forward. So you can see from the wonderful bits here is that so when you deploy it, all of the virtual centers, the NSX managers and everything like that goes into the management domain. So obviously you have to work around sizing to make sure that all of those components can be hosted inside there. So like we said, you can have 4 nodes into the management environment. As you start building things out, you might need additional resources because you can have quite a few workload domains. And obviously, if you're put in additional NSX managers and virtual centers and everything like that, you have to make sure you have the resources in the management environment to host that. So when you deploy the workload domain, it's similar to what we went through during the bring up, is that you have to go through and make a number of decisions. So licensing, again, you can deploy and then license afterwards, or you can license as part of the actual creation. We'll touch on SSO in a minute, but one of the main things you have to decide on is whether you want to use images or baselines. Now, there are some choices around that. You know, some people are still using images, whereas, you know, you might want to go to baselines and things like that. Around NSX, you have to deploy first off with the first workload domain, and then going forward, make that decision. But again, it's things like choosing principal storage. So whereas the management workload domain has to have vSAN, when you come to additional clusters in the management domain or for your workload domain, you then have the ability to choose what your principal storage is, and that can be vSAN, vVols, NFS, or fiber channel. And again, as I mentioned, that makes a choice on the number of nodes that you might need to do that bring up. All of those nodes already have to be in the SDDC Manager. So we covered that last week, in that you bring a node into the SDDC Manager database, that then it knows about it, it has the ability to interact with it and everything like that. And then once it's inside the SDDC Manager, you can then use it to either do additional clusters or workload domains going forward. One question that gets asked quite a lot is around the sharing of distributed switches. There is no sharing of them, so the distributed switch gets created each time you either create the workload domain or a cluster. There is not the ability to, at the moment, share distributed switches. So where people ask, can you share like a distributed switch across cross clusters and things like that, you can't at the moment. So that's one thing to take into account as part of your design, and it's a question that gets asked quite a lot as well. So as part of the configuration is the ability to do a stretch cluster as well. And what that allows you to do is have an environment that is stretched over cabinets, environments, data centers, depending on your design, based on some of the requirements around networking and things like that. But what that allows you to do is have the ability to have fault domains. So it's a failure environment. So if rack 1 fails, all the workloads fail over to rack 2, or potentially data centers and things like that, depending on your networking around that. So around this, we won't go into real in depth around this, but one thing to to understand is that if you want to stretch your workload domain, the management domain has to be stretched as well. So it's not, you can't have a management environment that isn't stretched and then a workload that is stretched. So when you come to the planning of it, then you need to take into account that you have to stretch management and the workload. So the reason you think around that is, as we mentioned earlier, is all of the virtual centers, the NSX managers and everything like that are held in the management domain. If you don't have the management domain stretched and you try to stretch like the workload domain, if the management domain was to fail, you wouldn't have the virtual center, the NSX managers or anything like that for your workload domain. So as part of that, you have to stretch management before you then stretch the workload domain. So the reason you talk about things like that is, as part of the design, you would need 4 hosts in each site. So that's the minimum requirement for management. That's the 4 nodes. And then to stretch it, you have to have the equivalent on the other side. So as a minimum, you would need 8 nodes for the management. And then as you drop down to the workload domain, depending on what primary storage and things like that you have, you could have a number of nodes, but it always needs to match in each site. So if you've got 4 in one site, you have to have 4 in the other. You can't have 4 in one and 2 in the other. It has to be a matching on each side. So when it comes to the workload domain, you have a number of options. So you can share the SSO domain with the workload domain. So that would give you what everyone talks about, the single pane of glass where you could log on to Virtual Center, you would see all your resources and everything like that. So you have the ability to join each of the workload domains into the management SSO domain, and it will automatically set up replication and things like that. Now, that does have a limitation in that you can only have 14 workload domains in that topology. So if you decide to join everything into the same SSO domain, you're limited to the management domain and 14 workload domains. That is a limitation on the SSO topology. So you can see that in the first window, and you have the management domain and 14 workload domains. But what you can then do is you can do isolated workload domains. So what that means is each of the workload domains get their own SSO. So that works in things like, I used to work for a service provider where we were looking at the ability to be able to have a management domain and then give each customer a workload domain. So that might be a department, that might be something like that. And as you can see from that, is that you can have a mixture of workload domains that are in the same SSO and a number that are in their own. And in that configuration, you can have up to 24 workload domains. So you can see that is already an enhancement on what you could do if you had just the single workload domain. And obviously that doesn't give you the ability to log into the virtual centers and do the the single pane of glass management and everything like that. But if you were to then go to the fact that you had the management domain and then every workload domain underneath it was isolated, you can then span out to 24 isolated workload domains. So this isn't around necessarily numbers and everything like that. It's understanding what it means around management, what it means around configuration, decisions you have to make beforehand. So we spoke about this a lot last week when we were going through the Excel spreadsheet. There's a lot of things that you have to decide up front around configuration, DNS and all that type of things, and working out how you want your environment to look before you start deploying it is quite important. And that goes into, workload domains, how you're going to manage them. It's not just about the number of hosts that are going to be in it. It's about understanding about how you're going to manage it. Are you going to give over the management of the environment to other departments or teams and things like that? So the last thing we'll cover is that in 5.2 we brought in a new ability that previously you had to have. If you were going for an isolated workload domain, you had to have an NSX instance. So that would mean that for every one you deployed, you had to have your own individual NSX instance. What we brought in 5.2 is the ability to actually share NSX and still have an isolated workload domain. So there's reasons behind it. It enables you to do single management and bits and pieces like that. But it's just something to know that in 5.2 it was an introduction that you can now do an isolated with a shared NSX instance. So some of that will be around management, some of that will be around whether you have to have the segregation, maybe for compliance or something like that. So again, it's another thing to know about around a design decision as you're creating your environment. As you can see from that whizzy little thing, where you can share NSX amongst the workload domains. So as part of the workload domain, this is more around understanding the information that you need to supply for it. So we discussed that in the Excel spreadsheet. Is you've got to have the nodes, you've got to have all of them with the same primary storage, and it's about knowing what information you need to supply to actually create a workload domain. So we'll share this as normal, but you can see it's very easy to run through the wizard. Again, all of this can be done through API as well. So you might have some automation in there that brings up nodes, adds them in, and does it as well. But everything can be done through the UI and automation as well. And adding hosts, adding clusters. So it's all around knowing what you want to do with your environment. So as part of the expansion of any of this is you can obviously add hosts to a cluster. you can add additional clusters, you can add additional workload domains, and in those workload domains, you can have clusters and additional hosts as well. So it's knowing that you can do all of that type of expansion depending on what your requirements are going forward.
I don't know what we can see on screen. Can we see a PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep.
Brilliant. So just a quick bit of verbiage around NSX clusters. James has mentioned NSX a fair bit in what he was just talking about, but an NSX Edge cluster is the next bit on, really. If anyone's not really familiar with what an NSX Edge cluster does, it's a set of specific NSX nodes which handle all of the kind of upstream connectivity, I guess you could say, along with a few other bits of functionality around things like tier 1 and tier 0 gateways, various different network services that could include things like load balancers, VPN, things like that, but also are a requirement for being able to deploy an AVN. For those of you who aren't aware what an AVN is, it's called an application virtual network, and we use those predominantly for deploying the Aria Suite Lifecycle Manager and the Aria Suite into. I will do a quick little demo in a second of where those options are if you're not familiar, so that you can kind of get an idea of what they look like. But one of the main topics around NSX Edge and connectivity is going to be kind of that upstream connectivity. You've got various different options in which you can configure. There is the option of BGP, and there is also an option of static routes. Now, I'd say probably in an enterprise environment, static routes are probably not going to be something you're going to want to do. You've got to be able to manually maintain those. So BGP or Border Gateway Protocol is what a lot of people tend to use, but it's not an exact, it's not an industry view there. That's just something I've seen quite a lot of. And with that, you need various bits of data, and you can see on one of these screenshots on the slide, we've got here VLANs, we've got uplink interface addresses, we've got BGP IP addresses of my upstream device, we've got an ASN number or autonomous system number, we've got some passwords which are lovely and secure, and we've then got our second uplink. So one of the things you do need for edge nodes is you have to have two uplink VLANs and two uplink peers on your upstream device, whether that's another switch, whether it's a firewall, other network device, etc. You'll need those configured on there. So in terms of what we kind of need for BGP, we're looking at a couple of dedicated VLANs. We're going to need IP addresses available for your edge nodes for both uplinks, and you're going to need IP addresses configured on your upstream device and BGP configuration completed, which we won't really cover because that's going to be different for every type of device out there, but you're going to need very similar information. One of the other bits of data which I don't actually have in the screenshot here, but is worth being aware of, is that you will also need edge TEP addresses, and you'll need a separate VLAN for that as well. So for NSX itself, it will need a TEP VLAN that the NSX can make use of, but your edge nodes will need a separate TEP VLAN for this. You can't reuse the same one. So in terms of an additional requirement and point takeaway, you need 3 VLANs to do an edge deployment. You can reuse those VLANs if you were to do edge node deployments for other NSX instances for different workload domains. Whether you'd actually want to do that or not, I think there was a bit of a debate last week around you can do it. Whether you realistically would do that in the real world is another question altogether. And yeah, so that was that one. So I'm just gonna flick over to show you where you can do that configuration inside SDDC Manager. Hopefully we can all now see an SDDC Manager. So in here, I've got my workload domain. So I've just navigated into inventory and workload domains on the left. And we get this little option here. So you can either use the three dots on the side, or we can go into it here, and we've also got an actions list where we actually get a few more options as well. And we actually have the option here to do the edge deployment. Now, if we actually already had an edge deployed for this workload domain, we wouldn't have the option available. There's a bunch of requirements and prerequisites that we need to have a look at here. So always worthwhile familiarizing yourself with these and understanding exactly what you would need for that. And then you head off into the wizard, which looks a little bit like the thing I was creating a second ago in those screenshots. And you will go through, validate, and it will start to deploy. And then what you would then see happen is SDDC Manager will start talking to the vSAN server. It will start to spin up a resource pool to put your edge nodes into, and it will start to deploy the 2 NSX Edge images and deploy those virtual machines. I did try and actually get that sorted out earlier, so we could maybe have a nice little demo for that, but hit a snag and didn't have time to iron out why that wasn't working in our lab. So that's edge clusters, and in fact you can see my failed attempt kind of half in existence here. Actually, I didn't realize that produced itself. So 2 nodes and a little bit of detail saying that it's failing miserably to deploy because it died halfway through, probably because I'm halfway through an upgrade and then tried to make it do an additional deployment. Don't recommend doing that. So that is the NSX Edge in a very, very high level perspective. If we have any questions, it looks like they've all been answered on that. Yeah, cool. So let's go back to the slides.
Perfect.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Perfect. Yeah, the question is pretty much every NSX deployment needs edge clusters. So the management domain has to be in the management domain for sure. But what happened to the other domains? So the workload domains that deploys a new NSX, where do we place the edge nodes? Edge appliance.
Edge nodes for additional workload domains. I think, and I want to get James to hopefully clarify this for me. I think they still deploy into the management domain. Though, off the top of my head, I'm not 100% sure. I'll have to actually go research it. I haven't deployed one for quite a while, and the customers that I've been dealing with recently actually don't run them outside of their management domain. But I don't know whether that is actually just a personal preference on their part, or whether it was a default. So perhaps we can get a takeaway question, or take away that question, and we'll get you an answer. Probably in the study group chat, if that's all right. We'll try and get you an official answer, unless anybody else on the call, as it's not just me and James, here to answer the questions. Is there anybody else who does know the answer to that?
I don't have the experience, but it sounds logic to me to have it in the workload clusters because of hairpinning and stuff like that.
Pretty much. That's how I was deploying it last time. So in the VCF environment, I was building. We had 3 additional workload domains, and the edge nodes were in one of those workload domains.
Yeah, that's how mine are deployed. I have 2 separate workload domains, and I have edge nodes. The management NSX management nodes stay in the management domain, but the edge nodes deploy in the workload domain.
Yeah, so the tier 1 gateways, right? Or also the T0?
It's all of it, right? Because the workload domain tap networks have to be able to talk to the edge nodes that are configured for that workload domain. So it's separate VLANs all the way across.
Precisely this.
So I think we've got various different answers. Hopefully that covers it off. I will try and get a official statement on that. Again, this exam probably doesn't cover into that level because that's more of a design-based thing. You'll probably be seeing that type of stuff in the architect exam, not necessarily in the administrator exam. So for the purposes of the knowledge you'll need to know for the exam, I would say you probably don't need to know that. But it's always good to know it. So yeah, let me try and get that answered. And in fact, there's a link to help with that design stuff there. But yeah, if you don't mind, we'll follow up with that in the study group after the call. Right, let's just jump back to the slides. So now, again, we have touched upon certificate management in the previous sessions, but I thought we'd maybe just go through it in a little bit more detail if people actually wanted to see it happen. And this process will now exist not only just for the management domain, but as we've now talked about workload domains, what we will now be able to do is actually manage all of the certificates for all of the deployed components from a management perspective from inside SDDC Manager. So in this particular screenshot here, I've got this is all for my management domain at the moment. I've got my vCenter, I've got my SDDC Manager, and I've got my 3 NSX nodes, and I've apparently missed off the line, which would also show you the VIP address or node in inverted commas for NSX as well. And what you can there do is select one of those, or actually multiple objects, generate the CSRs, and then start to move through. So what we'll to do is just show you that now. We'll redeploy some of these certificates, or one of them at least anyway. Okay. So again, I'm back into my workload domain. We've then got the certificates option here. Now, one of the first things I've done before I've actually done this, and if I hadn't have done a configuration, which I'll show you in a second, for a CA, we wouldn't actually have this button available. So what has been done is, if we look down here in certificate authority, I've configured this to talk to just a Windows certificate server, or Microsoft certificate server. There is also the option to be able to use OpenSSL as another certificate authority option. And because I've now got that configured, SDDC Manager can interface directly with that certificate authority to produce me my certificates. So let's push out, let's do a vCenter one quickly. So I can now select this button here. If I do the generation first, I can then specify a bunch of bits and pieces into there. All the usual information that you would normally add into a certificate. I'm going to put in some subject alternate names. So I'm actually going to put my common name as my SAN name as well. And sometimes when you don't do that, you do get some issues with different browsers, etc. these days. And I'm going to generate the CSR. And off it will go. We'll get a task potentially appear at the bottom. And we will, yeah, we will. Which says that has completed, and you get a lovely banner. And you'll get another notification over here saying that the CSR generation has been successful. And if I now reselect that, I could download the CSR if I wanted to do it manually. So if I didn't have that certificate authority integration, I could download that certificate request, send it off to my CA, whether that is a different team or it's just a type of CA that isn't compatible with SDDC Manager, generate certificate, and I could manually upload and install certificates. Or, because I am using a Microsoft CA that is compatible, I can now go and click on the generate signed certificate. I can select my Microsoft certificate server that I've already got, and I can hit generate. And away it'll go. I'll start that process. And there you go, done it already. Now, from an administrative perspective, I don't know about anybody else on the call, but I've definitely been part of teams where I've not necessarily had access to the certificate authorities. They've been guarded by a different team. And sometimes the process of trying to handle what is potentially a fairly simple lifecycle operation could be actually made really easy by doing it through here. You don't have to involve other teams, you don't have to wait. You can just get on with it. As long as you've got your certificate templates configured correctly on the certificate authority, nice and easy to go. And then we're going to click vCenter server again and complete the process. So certificate generation has been successful. I'm now going to hit install certificate. We won't wait for this because it will take a few minutes. But what it will do is go off and reinstall a new certificate from the same certificate authority. And when it is complete, we'll get another certificate installation successful message over on the right hand side. And it is simple as that. If I was to have multiple workload domains, I would have all of those different components. You know, there'd be at least all the vCenter servers, and if I was deploying my NSX managers into those multiple potentially workload domains, I'd get those appearing here as well. Anything I missed on that one, James?
Nope, all good.
All right. How are we doing on time? We're doing all right. Now let's jump back to in a similar vein. Let's talk about password management. Now, again, we have touched on this in the previous sessions, but I thought as we are now kind of myself and James are trying to target going through the actual objectives now in a more structured way after the overview that we did in the first session. We'll just talk a little bit about some of the options. We've got three, I guess, main options for changing a password. We've got the update password. So providing that the password on the actual endpoint, so let's say for argument's sake, the endpoint is an NSX manager at the moment, and you want to update the admin password for an NSX manager, providing that the password is still valid on the NSX manager in question and not expired or incorrect, and the database in SDDC Manager has the correct password because that is where it was set originally, and you've been continually managing your password through SDDC Manager, you will then be able to use the update password option, and that is where you can then provide a password which then SDDC Manager will store in its database securely, and will also go off and update on the endpoint, in this case an NSX Manager. So that's where you can actually provide something that you've chosen. We've then got the rotate option, which again, providing that the SDDC Manager still has a valid password for the endpoint and it's not expired on the endpoint, you can hit the rotate button. And in this case, SDDC Manager will go ahead and create a random password that will then get set on the endpoint, updated in its database, and then you would have to query through either the SDDC CLI, through, I think it's, I can never remember which way around it is, whether it's password lookup underscore lookups or lookup underscore passwords. It's one of the two. You could then also use the APIs to retrieve those passwords as well, or a bit of Power VCF should you wish to retrieve those passwords, and then you could go away and update your password management solution with an updated password. And then we've got a third option, which is remediate. This one's quite important, that if you've let passwords expire or you've had problems on the endpoints and you've had to manually update them. So let's again continue with the same example of the NSX Manager. Your admin password has expired. You've then had to go onto that appliance, onto the console or SSH, and update that password to something new. SDDC Manager now doesn't know about it. So what you've got to now do is remediate SDDC Manager's copy of that password. So what you would have done is update it manually on the endpoint, come into the SDDC Manager, and provide that password as a remediate option for the endpoint, which would then bring it all back into sync and would be able to start managing it all again going forward. There is now a fourth option, which kind of ties in with the rotate, in that you can actually set up auto rotation for passwords. And I will show that in a second as well, and I'll show you all those options. And then finally, we've got the ability to not only do it in the UI, which you can see in that screenshot, but there are also APIs in which you can make use of to be able to do all this. And we will we'll take a quick look in a second. And thank you. It is lookup underscore passwords. Thank you very much. I never remember that until I actually come to use it. Right, let's jump back to the lab. The process is still going. There we go. Right, so let's go to password management. So in here, I have a bunch of my endpoints. You can actually see that at the moment, I have actively got SDDC Manager configured and connected to certain endpoints, because I actually rotated these passwords because they're about to expire the other day. So I went in and did I actually did an update because I specified another really secure password that may have included a 1 and an exclamation mark. And you can see they've got the status. But if we were to then click on the ellipsis here, we've then got the update password option. which I can't click because we also have the certificate replacement operation going on at the same time, which is probably worthwhile mentioning. There are certain operations in inside SDDC Manager that it can't do concurrently. And at the moment, it is doing a certificate operation. What it now can't do is go and kick off one of these because it is related in some fashion to the previous operation that is going on and the thing we're now trying to do. Can I do it on one of these? No, I think it's going to stop me from doing it on all of them, frustratingly. Brilliant. But what we can do, and it's not even there now, let me have the option for schedule, is it? Oh, that's rubbish. I've learned a lesson there. Was that going to hurry up and finish, I wonder? And then we can show you that. Perhaps we'll jump back to that. But what you would get, if I try and visualize it for you, is here we've got the options of update and remediate, the two that we spoke about. If I was to actually tick this box, what we would normally get is we get some options across the top to be able to schedule rotations or rotate the passwords for the items I have selected. It's just not showing me those purely because it is doing that that certificate replacement at the moment. So we'll move on to the last bit, and then if that has finished the time, we'll flip back and just show you that. And then a bit about backups. It's being that we're doing an administration exam. One of the key things you want to do as part of administering your environment is actually making sure you've got some valid backups. These are all important for reasons I probably shouldn't have to really go into in much detail. But they're also going to be really important for when you come to upgrades. You are going to get reminded quite frequently throughout a lot of the upgrade wizards. Have you taken a file-based backup? Or for instance, I hit a scenario when I was doing an upgrade on one of our environments the other day, that there wasn't a recent enough NSX backup that in existence that it was happy with. So by default, after you've deployed your management domain, your SDDC manager will be configured with a backup, and your NSX managers will be configured with a backup. The NSX manager by default backs up to a share on the SDDC manager. Now, that's great and all until you hit a big problem and you lose your SDDC manager and you can't bring anything up. For other reasons, you might have multiple failures. Having everything kind of in one place, or all your eggs in one basket, is probably not the most ideal thing. So one of the recommendations is that one of the first things you do need to do is configure your backups out to a third-party endpoint or solution, being whatever that might be. And you've got different protocols in which you can back up to, which I'll show you in a second. There's various built-in schedulers. The scheduler that you can see on screen is for the SDDC manager. You have an option there to be able to take a backup on state change, which is quite a cool feature. So rather than it just going on a schedule, if you are making changes, you can actually get it to take a backup immediately afterwards, which is quite a cool feature. And you've got the usual kind of retaining backup configuration options there. And of course, our good old vSAN to file-based backups still exist. They actually by default don't configure to go to SDDC Manager, so you would need to go in and get that configured straight away. So I'm gonna just show you a couple of those wizards in case anybody hasn't had the chance to see them yet. Let's have a look at SDDC Manager first. Oh no, it sort of did. I just haven't done it, I think. That's my problem. I haven't actually got it to start backing anything up yet. So here you go. There is the default location, and that is the same place that NSX will back up to as well. It's using the SFTP protocol. It's using a built-in backup account, which exists inside SDDC Manager. We're using a standard port and a various different bits and pieces there. And then that is where you would then see them when they're actually backing up, but I don't actually back this up. I just take snapshots because it's a nested environment. The snapshots are not backups. We should all know that by now. Let's have a look at NSX. Log me out again. Rubbish. Let's have a quick look at the wizard in here. And this I did check earlier. We head over to System, and then we have our backup and restore under Lifecycle Manager. And this is all default. I didn't set any of this up. This all came out of the box. And if I was to edit this, sorry, that's the schedule. I mean this. You will see that same URL, which is just this an NFS mount on the SDDC Manager, and you got various bits and pieces that are configured on that. And you've got schedules, etc. My last one failed probably because it was powered off. And yeah, that's where you do it in there. Nothing overly complicated, not too dissimilar to what you would see in a vSAN backup, which we've got over here. So for the purposes of just giving you something to take a look at during the call, you probably wouldn't really do this in the real world, but it was the only endpoint I had available at the time, which is I just configured vSAN to also do its file-based backups over to the same share. And again, this should be something people have seen before. We're popping in our different protocols. There's a list here of the different ones available. So we've got FTPS, we've got HTTPS, we've got SFTP, we've got FTP, NFS, SMB, and HTTP as the different protocols available. So quite a few to choose from. And again, that wizard should look fairly familiar if you've done any vCenter administration. And they're the three main backups.
So obviously we've covered a load of extra bits. So for the next session, we will be looking at upgrades and the Aria integration. So that's what we're looking to cover next week. So if anyone's got any specific things you want us to run through or anything like that, then as Frankie's mentioned, we've got the Discord and stuff like that. But yeah, that's our thoughts on what we're going to be covering next week.
One of these last ones from Damien. Is there a backup appliance or just admin preference for OS storage?
There isn't a specific backup appliance. Each component, so whether it's SDDC Manager, vCenter, or NSX, have their own backup configuration wizards. I'm not too sure what you mean by the preference for OS or storage. Are you meaning just your target location for that, Damien? Perhaps you may be not able to come off mute. Oh, no, you are.
Yeah, I am talking about the target. I was just wondering if you guys had a easy to deploy appliance, or if this is just the administrator preference for what their target was. I saw some people were talking about Windows for SFTP, but of course my preference would have been, deploying something Linux based for the destination if I'm going to use SFTP or SSH protocols.
Yeah. You could have any. Well, I say any. It's probably a little bit broad, but there are a lot of different options out there for a backup location. Yes, you can use Windows as a backup target. Yeah, I don't think that would be my preference personally either. But it could be a dedicated backup appliance through one of the the backup technologies. They if you've got a disk-based backup appliance of some description. I know I've used, I can't remember which product it was now, because it's a few years ago and it eludes me, but we used to actually present some shares off of that storage to do our file-based backups too. And then that appliance effectively was the shorter term backup staging, and then we'd offload that to longer term storage on larger kind of windows. But yeah, there's all sorts of different ones, as long as it can support that protocol, that list of protocols that we had in the UI. I don't believe there are any other real major limitations off the top of my head, but it'd be something you have to dive into in a little bit more detail. But I think in short, you can use pretty much anything that supports those protocols.
Thank you.
No worries. Thanks for the question. Yeah, big shout outs to the Hands-On Labs as well. Thanks again, Vladimir, for putting in the links and things. and trying to keep up the questions with us. Thank you. Yeah, Hands on Lab is a great place to start. If you've never really had the opportunity to play with VCF, perhaps your organization isn't using it, or it's just not something you've had exposure to. The Hands on Lab is a fully built environment ready to go within a few minutes. Yes, you can't do everything in there, but you can do most things that we've been talking about so far in these sessions. You can certainly have a play. You can't exactly go and deploy a new backup location, for instance, because you won't have the availability to do that. But there's no reason you couldn't go and configure them to point to that inbuilt share on the SDDC Manager, for instance. So, yes, just looking at that last statement in there, backing it all up to itself in loose terms isn't necessarily the best thing in the world to do. It's just giving you somewhere to back it up to by default. It is recommended to back it up to a third-party solution and not to SDDC Manager as a permanent idea. So, yeah, definitely an external destination for backups is the recommendation.
But thank you everyone for participating, continuing the conversation. We love.
Thank you.
Cheers, over to the Discord if you want to carry on the conversations. The more people we get in there, more conversations we can have, more questions we can answer, more people can learn. We're not just sorry, quick last one there. Are we capturing the comments? We don't post the transcription or anything in all the comments necessarily, but what we do is capture all the links that we post to questions and kind of just pop those in as a title list. There's a pinned post in the study group channel in Discord, which I'll update again later on today or tomorrow with all of the latest links for today's session. What's next week? Myself and James haven't worked that out yet, but it will probably start to follow the next set of things in the blueprint, most likely, unless James already has an idea, which he might do.
Yeah, so that will probably lead, like Stefan said, it will follow the blueprint, but it will be likely to be the upgrade and can't remember what else.
That was like an hour ago we had that conversation. Right?
I can't remember what the other bit.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, the Aria. So we'll go into upgrades. We'll talk about the different online, offline, everything like that, and we'll also start touching on the Aria products and things like that as well. So that's what we've currently got in mind for next week, but obviously might change depending on what we come up with.
Or what the lab will let us do that week is the next question.
Yeah.
Cheers all. Thanks again, Frankie.
Oh, no, thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone. Take care. All right. Bye.
Cheers, Frankie.
Later on. Bye.
Bye.